Hi guys, Aceface back with another video for you, and I am back with another Tyranid tactics advice from the Hive Mind, some advanced tactica coming at you. And today we've got an interesting subject. Rather than a specific unit, I'm going to focus in on troops choices and what we've got to offer in the current meta. Right guys, before we get started, just want to point you in the direction of a couple of ways where you can follow me further. So I'm very active on Instagram, so you can check me out there. On Instagram I post a lot of my work in progress as well as tournament progress and up and coming information on tournaments I'm running or tournaments that I'm going to. All sorts of good stuff over there on Instagram. Of course, probably one of the best places to catch me as well is over on Twisted Dice, my sister channel, which is the home for all the cool battle reports. We've got a absolute channel and archive full of cool 8th edition battle reports, loads of cool armies. We've pretty much got every army covered, so there's almost certainly something for you there, and if you haven't already, jump over and give that a sub. You can catch me on Facebook as well, and ultimately, if you'd like to really support the channel, you'd like to support me doing what I'm doing, you can back me on Patreon, where you can get an opportunity to get some exclusive Aceface dice and some other merch, including some cool limited edition t-shirts and some other cool swag as well. And thank you to the guys that do back me on Patreon. You guys are absolute bosses, and you're the ones that really keep me going and keep me kind of pushing this channel on, as well as the Twisted Dice channel as well. You really do support me with that. You've helped me with more kit for the channel, and you just push things on forward, so I can't thank you enough, guys. But anyway, on to today's subject, and what I'm going to be talking about is troops. I've got my trusty codex, so if you want to follow me along, you can follow me here. Lots of people have requested I put more kind of like diagrams and kind of graphics and things. Don't really have the kind of tech know-how to kind of get that going, so apologies there, but thank you very much for all your suggestions. I really appreciate it, so thank you for watching, and keep those suggestions. If it's something I can put in there, I will. I'll try and break it up with a few more pictures this time, so you don't just have to look at me and hear me drone on, but yeah, I'm always trying to look to improve, so thank you very much for all your feedback, guys. So we're going to cover troops, and the reason why we're going to cover troops, and this is real advanced tactica, guys, so this isn't your basic stuff, and the reason we're going to try and cover troops and dig into some really cool kind of tactics and way to use these guys to your best advantage is because of, one, the meta, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and two, the fact that the Tyranid troops are actually some of the best troops in the game, and if they're utilised properly can be absolute game winners, and something that I'm sure that a lot of Tyranid players out there are not necessarily using to their full advantage. So the units that we're going to cover today is we're not going to cover everything in the troops choice, and I'll tell you why. So we're not going to cover Tyranid warriors because they just aren't an optimum build for a competitive build. Yes, they're still a good unit, they have a place, they're not terrible at all, and there's some certain builds that make them very effective. I'm not dismissing that, but when we're talking about true use of troops and how we can most effectively use this codex, the Tyranid warriors don't come into that bracket. We're also not going to talk about Gene Stealers, and you may ask, well, how can you not be talking about Gene Stealers? They're one of the best units in the codex. They are, but their job and their use is very different from a lot of the other units that we're going to cover. And I have a whole video on how to utilise and use Gene Stealers to the best of their ability, and you can check that out. I'll put a link up there, or there, or somewhere around there where you can check that out, and I'll put a link in the description as well, so if you want to see that video, you can jump over and see all your tactics on how to use Gene Stealers to the best of their ability. The units we're going to focus on today, guys, we're going to focus on the little humble Termagant, the little Hormagant, and the always key Ripper Swarm. They're the three units we're going to focus on, and we're going to focus on the different advantages and disadvantages of all of these units and how to use them most effectively. So let's start off with the Termagant. So we'll talk about the units themselves a little bit, and then at the end I'll talk about playstyle and tactically how you kind of fit these into your swarms and your hive fleets. So the Termagant, now basically one of our real basic troops. It's it's been there since the day dot. Little bug, doesn't do very much. It moves 6, which is not particularly slow. It hits on 4s for both weapon skill and ballistic skill. Has a strength of 3 and a toughness of 3, 1 wound, 1 attack, a leadership of 5, and a save of a 6+. So not that great, not that great at all. You've got a few options that you can take with weapons. You can take them with the Devourer, you can take them with the Flesh Borer, you can take them with the Spine Fists. Flesh Borer is your standard go-to. That is basically a bolt pistol, if you like. So it's strength 4, no AP, 1 damage. It's it is what it is. Pretty basic. You've got the Devourer, which is assault 3, which is quite nice, and it has a slightly longer range. So rather than 12 inches, it's 18 inches. And then you have the Spine Fists, which are a pistol, and with the Spine Fists you can have as many shots as the unit has attacks. So with the Termagants, you can have 1 shot with a Spine Fist. Strength 3, it's not really great, but it is a pistol, so you can shoot it in combat, so it has some advantages. Okay, now what other little extras these guys have? So they have Hail of Living Ammunition, and that is if a unit contains 20 models, they can reroll wound rolls of 1 when they shoot. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. That's not to be underestimated, because when you've got a lot of these guys and you're shooting, they can do some work. So these units can be taken in 10 to 30. Now when you're talking about Termagants, the only really way to take them is in a big unit of 30. You don't want to be taking them in any less than that. They die very, very quickly with a 6-up save, toughness 3. They're going to die in droves. There's no doubt about that. There's a few ways of making them a bit more survivable, and we'll talk about that, but they're going to die quickly. But 30 of them is a big blob of troops to go through. And particularly as potentially these guys are going to be fearless, they're not going to be taking any morale tests, and again we'll talk about that. That's a lot of troops they've just got to get through. There's also the opportunity to soak up a lot of board space. Now the Devourers, that's a lot of shots, and you can use these effectively offensively and defensively. So if you're going to take your Termagant offensively, you're going to take them with the Devourers, and you might take a few Flesh Borers to keep the points down. You might take 10 Flesh Borers, 20 Devourers, or just 10 Devourers and 20 Flesh Borers. You can use different tricks. You can potentially put some of these in a pod, or have these burrowing up with your Trigons or Trigon Primes. They're all not bad tactics offensively or defensively, which is where I think these guys are going to shine more for you. Is there a great big block of space on the battlefield, objective secure, fearless little guys that are just going to grind the enemy out and just be irritating, and they're very, very cheap, so you cannot go wrong with that. So there are your two kind of forms of taking the Termagant, and ultimately it depends on your playstyle and what their job is, but for me defensively these guys are particularly strong. Excuse me. Right, I'm going to take a little sip of tea, and we're going to go on to Hormagants, and obviously at the end of the sip we're going to talk about how to play these and how to get the best out of them. The Hormagant is a lot quicker, so it moves 8, so it's going to be hammering up that ball pretty quick. Other than that, its stats are very, very similar. It does have 2 attacks rather than 1, which is quite nice. It has Scything Talons, so 1s that can reroll in close combat. So this is definitely your combat little bug. It's a lot quicker, it's going to get up in your enemy's face. It has a few little extras, little extra rules. So it has Bounding Leap, and this is really, really key. Whenever this unit piles in and consolidates, it can move up to 6. Now that is incredibly powerful, really, really powerful, because that is going to give you the ability to wrap units, keep this unit safe, but also make up some serious amount of space on the board. So it's a really good weapon to use, and this is a weapon that if you practice with this unit, it can be extremely effective. Its second special rule is Hunger and Swarm. If the unit contains 20 models, you can reroll 1s to wound in the fight phase. So this is quite nice because obviously again, you're going to get these guys in, they're going to be rerolling 1s to hit, rerolling 1s to wound. That's not bad at all, and these guys will quite effectively chew through very light infantry, so guardsmen, cultists. If these guys can get the jump on them, they will go through them quite quickly. I mean, hitting on 4s is not the best, but the rerolling 1s is quite tasty with the rerolling 1s for wounds. But one of the big things with these is they're going to get up the ball really quickly. With that base move of 8, you chuck in a run, potentially obviously depending on what high fleet you take Kraken, they're going to really move up the ball quickly, they're going to take lots of space and they're going to be in your opponent's face. So it's really effective, and then potentially the fact that you can wrap things so effectively with that pile-in makes them incredibly effective as well. Very cheap. Very cheap. So again, we'll move on, and I'll keep repeating myself, but we'll move on and talk about how to utilise these guys going forward, but definitely an aggressive but very handy unit. The last unit I'm going to talk about in the troops is the Ripper Swarm. The Ripper Swarm, they are invaluable in your Tyranid armies because they are the cheapest troop choice. You can chuck 3 of these in, make a battalion with a cheap HQ, and then you're quickly getting those CPs up. So just 3 units of Rippers and a couple of Neurothroats, and actually you've got a very cheap and cheerful battalion to produce yourself some points. And then you've still got useful units there because the Neurothroats are very good, and as we go on to the Ripper Swarms are very effective as well on the board. So you've got CPs there readily available, and these guys are pretty good. So the Ripper Swarms, they basically have one little option you can take on them. You can take Spine Moors, and they are a pistol 4, they're strength 2, no AP and 1 damage, 6 range. I suppose if you've got a couple of points, I even think then you'll almost certainly find better uses for those points. So don't take them with them, no point. And their special rule, which is where they really come into their own, is Burrowers, not Borrowers. Burrowers, and then it means is during deployment you can set a unit of Rippers underground instead of on the battlefield. At the end of any movement phase, they can tunnel up onto the battlefield as long as they're outside of 9 of an enemy model, and that is so good because these guys they're no threat to the enemy at all, but they're made just small, and that means they can come up in turn 2 or turn 3. Sit on an objective in a corner, sit in a bit of ruin, make sure you're getting line breaker, and they'll earn you points. Every time they will earn you points. These guys, if you can leave them back as long as possible before you release them onto the battlefield, they are absolutely just a key little thing to put in. I always try to have 1 unit of Rippers in my lists if I can. If not, 2 is really handy. You can have 1 that maybe just sits there in your own deployment zone, not doing anything but hopefully just hiding, and then able to kind of jump on an objective. And you can have 1 that you drop in turn 3, takes that line breaker, takes that enemy objective. Just real nuisance unit, just really solid. They've still got 3 wounds, 4 attacks. They're not bad, and they're toughness 3 rather than toughness 2 in your Nurglings. Obviously nowhere near as resilient, but still, these guys are a real effective unit. I really like Rippers. I think they're great. You cannot go wrong with putting a unit of these in. If you're not already, just try it. Try putting in 1 or 2 units of Rippers, hold them back for turn 3, jump them down, and just work out over the space of 2 or 3 games how many points these little guys have got you. Because I guarantee you that these guys will probably get more points for you than some of these bigger units that you're expecting to do the heavy lifting. The Rippers are such a crucial unit. And really on Rippers, that's more or less it. That's how you should use them, and that's what I'd recommend. So definitely I would recommend you put them in your lists. Have a unit, at least a unit in every one of your Tyranid lists. Give yourself the extra points to spend on other key units, and give you that key little 3-man bases that's going to just literally just go in a corner, jump up, do something irritating, really, you know, just be a pain and give your opponent something else to think about. Do it, let me know how you get on, let me know if they're working for you in a certain way, whether you prefer to take units of 4, do you take a full unit, you know, what do you do with these guys? Be really interested to hear. I mean, you can take a unit of 9 of these guys. Is anyone out there taking a unit of 9? Do they work for you? Really interested. But I just think a minimum unit of 3 is fantastic in these guys. So let me know how you get on with them, but that's how I use them, and I love using them. They are such a crucial unit for me. But now going back to the main event, which is the Termagant and the Hormagant. Which you go for is down to personal preference. Now, I would say the more experienced players that like to be really kind of tactical and janky and ducking and diving tend to favour the Hormagants just because of the tricks you can do with them. And balled possession and taking up space on the battlefield is so crucial, both early game and throughout. If you can block your opponent, if you can apply pressure, if you can take ground, if you can go into those corners of the board, you're in a really strong place, and you're making your opponent have to deal with this unit. And they're really cheap and cheerful. If they kill them, you're not losing very much, but actually if it takes them a few of their units to do it, then you've just taken the heat off another unit you don't want them piling shots into, and you've also blocked them in. If they don't have fly against a heavy Hormagant army that's flying up the board first turn, they're going to get penned in really quickly, and that's going to give you space to get those key positions on the battlefield to be able to move forward. That's kind of what they're there for. And as I said, that experienced player will be able to really manipulate that pile in, that consolidate. You know, you're really going to be able to, I mean, scouts are a key one. You know, a lot of people are taking scouts, they're taking Nurglings, they're taking these to really to make sure that the deep strikers are not going to come in, that you're not going to be able to get to their good stuff. What you can do with the Hormagants, and this is where fancy diagrams would be amazing, guys, but what you can do, and you can do this with Termagants, but it's much easier with Hormagants, you can move up, and then what you can do is you can then put a chain of Hormagants. You don't want all your Hormagants going into these scouts, because if all of the Hormagants go into the scouts, you kill the scouts and then you get shot off. So what you're doing is you're making sure that only a few of those Hormagants are going to get in for the first combat. So you're going to get 3-4 Hormagants maybe in against those scouts. They're not going to kill the scouts. They're not even going to kill enough to cause a morale check. But what they are going to do is then give you the ability that then in the pile-in you can wrap those scouts up. So those scouts cannot fall back, and that means your Hormagants cannot be shot. Then in their turn, now you've wrapped them, you finish off those scouts, you consolidate that 6 inches, then you're up again. And probably this next time you're not going to be able to do the same trick again. If you can, and they're min-maxing and they don't have fly, you can do it again, and you can keep doing this and irritating your opponent, and again just making them have to deal with you. It's a great tactic, and it's one that you can utilise because of the current meta, because people are playing with scouts, they're playing with things that hold ground, and that's what Hormagants do so well. So you can do that. You've got to be clever with that movement. You can't throw them all up together. You've got to spread across, you've got to make sure that you've got the right amount, you've got to make sure that they're not engaging another unit, or potentially you do engage 2 units and you wrap both units. It's also possible, but you just got to be clever with that movement, and that's why the Hormagant becomes quite an expert unit to use, because you leave that Hormagant high and dry in the middle. Yes, it's going to take a bit of shooting, but they're going to hose them down pretty quick. But you start wrapping small units, you start being clever with how you deal with these guys, you start making a real nuisance, and you'll start to make some real points out of them. I think there's a real strong argument to have 1-2 big units of Hormagants flying up the battlefield first turn, you know, really getting in your enemy's face, wrapping those scouts, wrapping those Nurglings, and just really pushing the pressure on, taking those objectives because their objectives secured. Really key tactic, works really well. Termagants. Now Termagants, they're not as janky, they're not as tricksy, they're not quite as clever as your Hormagants. They're more of an easy option, but they're still amazing. and we'll talk a little bit about some stratagems in a minute. But the Termagants have a lot of ways to be really irritating as well in defence. So the Termagants are an out and out defensive unit. So the Termagants, what they're going to do is they're going to sit in your deployment. They're going to slowly bring up, they're still going to come up, they're still going to make space, but ultimately these guys are there to just make sure your opponent's not getting anywhere near those key units like Hive Guard, you know, all your key characters that are sitting in the back. They're sitting there and they're really being a nuisance, and that works well, and you can slowly bring them up. As I said, they've got quite a lot of guns, you know, mass shooting, you know, you've got some Devourers in there potentially. Not, I think that's potentially the way to go. But you bring them forward, they put a lot of shots out, they hold that objective, and if you've got other units, aggressive things like Gene Stealers, things like Hive Tyrants, even teamed up with Hormagants going forward, the pressure is not going to be on those Termagants, which means they're going to do their thing, which means they're going to sit on objectives, they're going to take space, they're just going to be real heavy lifters for you through that long game. They're going to work really, really well. I wouldn't take them with a Termagant, as much as I think that has some advantages, and the Termagant is still a solid unit. The problem with the Termagant is when you point it out, it's almost always going to be more efficient for you just to have more Termagants. So I would love to be using a Termagant, and they do have advantages, particularly if you're able to take 2 of them, because you can really bring back those troops super quick, and that's effective. But when you work out how many Termagants you could get for your Termagant, you just might as well have more Termagants. It just almost always mathematically works out better for you. The Termagants are just that little bit too expensive. And also in the current meta, there's a lot of stuff that's really, really kitted out and able to deal with toughness 8. And with no invuln on the Termagant, she's going to die real quick. She's going to explode. It's not going to do good things for you. So don't go with it, basically, is where I'm getting at. But the Termagant itself is a really, really good unit, and definitely one I would take. Now, I'm going to give one unit a little bit of a mention here with the Termagants, because I think it's quite crucial, and that is teaming Termagants up with a Malanthrope is a really good tactic, because then you've not only got just a body of 30 gaunts that your opponent really has got to deal with at some point, or they're just going to hold all the objectives. You've now got a body of unit that also is -1 to hit. That's great, that's really good, because again you're just going to your opponent, well, shoot them all you like, but you're going to be wasting your bullets because you're now -1 as well. So Termagants with a Malanthrope are just a pain to deal with. What you can also do then, and we're jumping ahead slightly, is you make those Termagants Leviathan. So now against standard shooting with no AP, they have a 6-up, they have another 6-up again, because they have the Malanthrope next to them, and then the Malanthrope's making a -1 to hit. You really have got 2 blocks of troops that are really difficult to deal with, and you're slowly bringing that up, and you're slowly holding ground. It's working so well for you. Now, also, the great thing about both these units is they are so anti-meta from where we are at the moment. So Knights are the big thing, Smash Captains, really hard hitting stuff that's laying stuff out. Horde just really does well against it, and Tyranid Horde is probably one of the best, because it's very easy to make Tyranids fearless because you've got a Synapse creature, so you're not having to worry about that. So they've got to kill every last guy almost totally. They're cheap and cheerful, you know, they're just solid chaff to have. Really can't say enough good things about them. They are probably arguably better than the Cultists in some ways. Now that obviously could be argued, particularly if you take out Tide of Traitors. I would say the Termagant and the Hormagant are a better unit on the whole, particularly because of the other stratagems that you can use. So there's the units, and that's kind of your basics behind them. Well, not a little bit more than basics. But now let's talk a little bit about hive fleets and how to use these guys. And we will talk slightly back around the Rippers now, and talk about how these hive fleets will kind of factor into how you potentially might take them, even though with the hive fleet for for the Rippers is probably going to be very secondary, because these guys are your kind of your attacks, or your just little chuck-ins, just be irritating. But if used clever, they can still have some real benefits for you. So let's talk about some. Now, there's some key ones that obviously work quite nicely with the Hormagants. So you've got the Behemoth, which is going to allow you to reroll charges. You've got the Gorgon, which is not going to work out because that's rerolling ones. The fight phase, we've probably already got that with Hormagants anyway. The Jormungandr, I'll get used to saying that one day, is not bad because it will then give them a 5-up in the open, which makes them a little bit more survivable. It's definitely not a bad one. It also gives you the option to quite easily bring them burrowing in with different units. Not a bad tactic. Hydra is not bad as well. Hydra is pretty good because you will be re-rolling hit rolls in the fight phase, because you're almost certainly going to be outnumbering your opponent. So again, you know, Hydra is not a bad shout. People never take Hydra, but actually, probably for a very, very swarmy army, Hydra's not that bad. Kronos, obviously it's your shooting one. Not bad for your Termagants, but probably, you know, if you're taking Kronos, you're taking it for other reasons rather than your Termagants, because they're probably going to be staggering up. They're not going to be standing still, so it's not going to be as effective for them, but the anti-psyker stuff will be. But the two that definitely are your go-tos, you've got Kraken, which is ultimately amazing for your Hormagants, because you're rolling 3 dice, and you're 3 dice, and you're taking the one you want for the run for the advance move, which is crazy good. But also you can fall back and charge again, and that helps with that tactic even more. So you can wrap things, fall back, charge something else, continuously be an irritation. So again, it just helps with that real tricksy, janky way of playing Hormagants. And as I said, touched on, Leviathan, not bad at all at just making your defensive line even that little bit better. As I said, I will touch briefly on the Ripper Swarms, and the reason why I'm going to touch that is basically Kronos. So Ripper Swarms are really good at generating the Kronos stratagems for the Deepest Shadow, or you know, whatever it's called, but basically to trigger that making your opponent roll 1 dice for their psychic test, because it's within any unit within that high fleet. And because those Rippers are going to be up there, deep striking in, it works really well for them. So definitely a tactic to use. I really, really do rate that. But I would say overall, if you're going to go for your Hormagants, you're probably going to go for Kraken if you can, because that's probably your style of play. You're going to go very, very aggressive. You're going to get up in their face, and that ability to be able to fall out, fall back in, and to move so quickly is absolutely amazing. For your Termagants, actually, to be fair, your Termagants, they're such a defensive unit, you're probably going to be more stipulated by what else is in your army. But definitely Leviathan, I think, if you're going real heavy on your Termagants, it's definitely something that will just keep a few more of them alive. So it's not to be underestimated. So we're going to go into the stratagems. I'm going to talk a little bit about stratagems, and as I always do, I'm not going to go into every one, and if I've missed one that works so well for you, just please tell us what it is, so we can all learn together. So the first one that I go to, and it's a great one, is the Scorched Bugs. So Scorched Bugs is your one for your Termagants. It says it's 1 CP, use a stratagem when Tyranid unit from your army is selected to attack in the shooting phase. You can add 1 to the wound rolls made for the unit's flesh borers that attack in the shooting phase. So that's great, because if you think already you are rerolling 1s, and now you're adding 1 to hit as well. Just, you know, what's not to love about that? You're just making those a little bit more effective. I always really like Caustic Blood. Caustic Blood, I think it's the one. This is 1 CP again. Use a stratagem at the start of the fight phase. Select a Tyranid unit from your army. Roll a dice whenever the model from the unit is destroyed in that phase. For each roll of a 6, the enemy unit inflicted the final wound suffers a mortal wound after all attacks have been resolved. This is amazing for both Termagants and for Hormagants. That you run in, you know, if you're going against something nasty, particularly with those Hormagants, you know, they've done their first job. Now their second job is to really get in the face of something probably a little bit more scary. They jump in there, then you generate your Caustic Blood, so they kill a lot of the Hormagants, then you roll a bag load of 6s and you take them out that way. It's just incredibly powerful, really, really good. And then likewise, if you've got something that then gets in your face, like a Death Company bomb, or you know, something decides it has to plough in, or berserkers, piles into your front lines of Termagants that are shielding your good stuff, you generate that again, and boom, you've taken out models that cost 3 times the price. It's just a real good solid one. Love using it. Watch the look on their face. It's just genius. Let's have a quick look on. You've obviously got the opportunity to shoot again with your Flesh Borers. Unlikely you're going to go for that, but you never know, it might be the right option if you're against chaff. You know, chaff's coming at you, you've got cultists, you've shot them all once, you've already generated all your stratagems to make them more effective at shooting, then why not shoot them again with a mass load more of Flesh Borers? It's not a bad way to go. And then again, you have the opportunity to attack twice with your Hormagants. You're probably more likely to use this on Gene Stealers or better infantry models. But I'll tell you what, again, if you're coming into a big unit of cultists or guardsmen, you're actually going to rip those guys up pretty effectively. And that's pretty much the ones that I wanted to really cover. You've got some other ones like Adrenaline Surge, and you've got I can't even remember what it's called now. Let's have a little look. Can't remember what one it is. Overrun. So Overrun's pretty good actually. We'll touch on that. So that means if you've killed a unit and there's not a unit within 3, instead of consolidating, the unit can then move and advance if it was the movement phase, but can't move within 1 inch of an enemy model. Again, if you do decide, right, I'm going to kill this unit of scouts and I'm going to massively get up in their face. It's another great way of doing it with those Hormagants. You know, kill them off, then push on further forward. It's a great tactic, really solid. So yeah, there's quite a lot of different tricks in here. And if I haven't covered the one that you use, share it with all the rest of the guys. I'd be really interested to hear. Psychic powers. Nothing massive that I would really think that you're going to be using on these guys. You potentially might be using Catalyst on them, but you're probably again going to be using it on other things. That's really what you're going to be looking at doing. That's going to be your key one. You might use Onslaught, I suppose, but the psychic powers, again, you're probably not going to generate too much on these guys. You're going to be using on other models in your army. So they're the units. And that's the kind of tactics. So how would I build these in my army? So you want to go heavy on these guys. You don't want to go light. You don't want just a unit of 30. You want to be taking a minimum of 60, whether you're going with 2 blocks of 30, whether you're going with 2 blocks of 30, 2 blocks of 30 Hormagants, 2 blocks of 30 Termagants. You want to be going that. If you're going to go swarm, there's no point in going light on it, because you're just giving your opponent just some cheap kills, because they'll go through one unit. The dauntingness of having 60 gaunts that are potentially pretty much fearless, you know, they're not going anywhere, they're holding objective secure, they're either in your face or they're really holding down home territory and just making space in the midfield, is invaluable. So you want to be building your army with at least 60 of these guys, at least. But there's a strong argument that maybe you want to be looking at building it with more like 90, and you could potentially go farther than that if you really want to go swarmy. But these guys, building in this type of way, with a Malanthrope, with some Hive Guard, with some characters in there, some Neurothropes, you know, chuck in an aggressive unit of Gene Stealers, make them Kraken, and really get in your opponent's face to hold that whole ground. You know, all the tricky stuff that you can do, play those objectives, take out those small units, take out their infantry, pin them in their deployment zone, really make them fight their way through your little guys. Very thematic, very fluffy, but incredibly competitive. really strong, and in the current meta it will do so well. It's proven to do well, so don't just take my word for it. There are guys in the US, I'm going to remember his name now, Nick Rose I think his name is, I believe, he took more Gene Stealer Cult, but actually he took 60 Hormagants. You know, again, it's using that real just amount of bodies on the board. It works so well with some support batteries, with some smite, with some hive tyrants, whatever it might be your flavour. And watch my other videos to find out what units you want to use and what use you want to use them for. But hidden and working alongside with that huge body of troops will win us games. The big knights, they can't touch that type of list. They've got quite a lot of shooting, quite a lot of combat. They won't be able to deal with that amount of troops. They're just not going to win the game overall. They're not going to hold the objectives. They're not going to do enough damage, and you'll win the game. So there you go, guys. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward message. But get out there, start getting your gaunts back on the table, start bringing loads of them, bring that swarm in place. You know, something we've not really been able to do effectively for quite some time. It really does work. Get those support characters in, you know, get that Malonthrope for the -1, you know, maybe get some Gene Stealer Cult in there, particularly if the new codex when it comes out is strong. Pile it all together, you know, completely just get in your opponent's face and do the Tyranid thing, you know. So go forward and you know, go and do your High Fleet proud. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please do give me a like, give me a sub. It helps me tons, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.